The Red Mountain Story. The Red Mountain story begins almost 600 million years ago. At that time, a warm, shallow sea covered all of North America. Low islands rose above the surface. They were barren and rugged. No birds flew through the air, and no plants grew on the land. Mammals, and even the mighty dinosaur, were still hundreds of millions of years in the future. But the sea teemed with life. Seaweeds were abundant. Jellyfish swam among forests of primitive sponges, while worms and early mollusks burrowed in the soft mud of the seafloor. Ancestors of the starfish and sea urchin lived side by side with the dominant animal of the time, the trilobite. This is the time geologists call the Cambrian. Rocks of Cambrian age occur under most of the city of Birmingham, and fossils of Cambrian age animals can be found in these rocks. Conditions changed slightly, and new groups of animals appeared. Many of the more ancient types developed in greater variety, and some of them are still living today. It was 500 million years ago, and the beginning of the time geologists call the Ordovician. The oldest rocks exposed in the Red Mountain Cut are of Ordovician age. They tell of a restless sea with new islands appearing and disappearing, volcanoes pouring forth ash, primitive reefs flourishing under a tropical sun, and strange animals inhabiting the muddy shallows. The dominant animal of Ordovician time was the giant cephalopod, a fierce predator that grew to a length of 12 feet and whose descendants, the squid, octopus, and chambered nautilus, still abound in the oceans today. The Ordovician reefs of Red Mountain are a rare and unusual type. The reefs were built by dasyclad algae. These strange species have no living descendants. They may have been plants that secreted limy skeletons or a primitive sponge-like animal. Beds of volcanic ash in the rock layers tell of volcanoes that existed to the southeast of Birmingham. We know the direction because the bentotite becomes thicker toward the southeast. We even know how long ago they existed. A sample of this same ash from Bessemer, Alabama, was dated by radioactive methods and gave us an age of 445 million years, plus or minus 10 million. Not a great error in such a long time. In spite of this, their exact location remains a mystery. The ancient volcanoes have never been found and may even have been in northern Africa, which was close by at the time. There are gaps in the geologic record of Red Mountain, missing layers of rocks called unconformities. They tell us of periodic retreats of the seas from this region that allowed the deposited rock layers to become eroded away. Some of the gaps are short, possibly only hundreds of years, but at least one period of erosion wiped out nearly 40 million years of accumulated sediment. The lands were still barren of life, but an important event occurred in streams and rivers during the Ordovician. The first vertebrate, backboned animal, a primitive, jawless fish, appeared. These fish first appear in the deposits formed by streams flowing into the Ordovician Sea. Their ancestors probably fled to freshwater because of the giant cephalopods and other fierce predators of the time. A strange group of animals lived in the early seas, and their fossils are preserved in the rocks of the Cut. They are called graptolites. Since they have no living relatives, scientists had a hard time classifying them. Some graptolites looked like jellyfish and floated. Others were attached to solid objects and resembled plants. They all had a structure called a notochord. This notochord puts them in the same classification as backboned animals. Though they did not look like it, they were primitive vertebrates. At the end of the Ordovician period, 425 million years ago, great changes took place in what is now Alabama. The seas became shallower, and the limestone of the Ordovician gave way to the vast areas of sandy shallows, low islands, barrier beaches, and shallow lagoons. It was the beginning of the Silurian period. The change can be seen in the cut where the gray limestone ends, and a series of red or brown sandstones and shales begin. Rapid rises and falls of sea level are shown by the thin, alternating layers of sandstone and shale in the Red Mountain Formation. Conglomerates, fossil pebble deposits, and crossbeds, cross-sections of ancient sand dunes and ripples, tell of the swift currents and ancient shorelines. Life of the Silurian was well adapted to these conditions. Many species of animals were burrowers in the shifting sediments. Others developed special shapes or structures to support themselves on the moving surface. One rare trilobite, a cast birminghaminus, named for the city of Birmingham, lived only in the intratidal environment in which the conglomerate beds formed. Tracks and trails, as well as actual fossils of these animals, are found in the rocks of the Red Mountain Formation. Two very important things happened during the Silurian period. The first land plants appeared at the tide line. Their roots were in seawater, but their leaves and stems were in sunlight and air. They were primitive, but they began the first colonization of the barren lands. Fragments of plant stems are present in sandstone beds of the Red Mountain Formation. In the shallow lagoons, billions of bacteria oxidized the dissolved iron in the water, causing it to settle in the bottom. Today, three major beds of iron ore can be seen in the cut. One of them, the Big Seam, is 20 feet thick. These beds contain up to 35% iron and were the basis for Birmingham's iron industry. It may seem strange, but Birmingham really owes its beginnings to a group of microscopic, iron oxidizing bacteria that lived 415 million years ago. The Silurian period ended about 405 million years ago. There were no acts of violence to mark this change. Less iron was deposited, and the upper Silurian rocks of the cut are yellow-brown in color. They seem to blend gradually into the rocks of the next period, the Devonian, although there is actually a gap, an unconformity, representing 40 million years. While the change was not violent, it was important. The Devonian sandstone in the cut reflects the erosion that produced the unconformity. The sand was derived from the Red Mountain Formation, which was eroded from the nearby high areas. The Devonian was an age of great coral reefs. Strange armored fish and great sharks hunted among beds of delicate glass sponges. The primitive plants of the Silurian shoreline had succeeded, and the once barren land was covered with the ancestors of today's mosses, horsetails, and ferns. On an eventful day during the Devonian, the first land vertebrae, an amphibian called Ichthyosiogeta, left the water to crawl into the shadows of the world's first forest. Devonian rocks in the cut are represented only by the Frog Mountain sandstone, about 25 feet thick, and a thin, 6-inch thick bed of maroon shale that is probably an ancient soil layer. For some reason, uranium minerals are attracted to rock layers that contain organic material. The thin bed of shale contains uranium in small amounts, associated with the remains of long dead Devonian plants and animals. As the Devonian period came to an end, 345 million years ago, the shallow coastal areas sank beneath the sea. It was the dawn of the time called the Mississippian. The plants of the Silurian had come a long way. Great coastal swamps flourished with tree ferns, club mosses, and horsetails, growing to heights of nearly 100 feet. The accumulated debris of these early swamps became the first coal beds. In these hot, steamy lands, amphibians and possibly the first reptiles multiplied. Insects crawled among the swamp plants and were preyed upon by ancient spiders and scorpions. In the shallow seas, sea lilies lived in large colonies. Their fossil remains are common in the Mississippian rocks. The Mississippian rocks of Red Mountain show that Birmingham was underwater, but not near the shore. They are limestone with a large quantity of a mineral called chert. Chert is chemically deposited. It is formed only far from shore or in an area of stagnant water where evaporation can take place. The lack of other chemical deposits, such as salt, probably indicates deep water, far from shore. Fossils of crinoids, brachiopods, and other marine animals are found in the Fort Payne Chert. The last great event in the Red Mountain story took place shortly after the end of the Mississippian period. All the rock layers deposited in the ancient seas were originally horizontal, but were warped gradually during Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and Mississippian times. About 300 million years ago, the warping process accelerated, and tremendous pressures in the earth caused the rock layers to bend and break. They were forced upwards into folds called anticlines and downward into folds called synclines. It was the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains. It was a slow process. As the forces increased, rock layers broke and slipped. Great earthquakes shook eastern North America. Even as the mountains were formed, streams eroded them downward. If the erosion had not taken place, the fold of rocks at Birmingham would rise 18,000 feet above sea level. The Appalachians would be higher than the Rockies. Now, you will hear a story about the red paint rock and the steel industry. In the early 1800s, two men from Tennessee, Friley and Jones, discovered what was then called red paint rock. This discovery, along with the discovery of limestone and coal within a 5 to 15-mile radius, enabled Birmingham to become one of the largest steel-producing cities in the U.S. The red paint rock was an iron ore. Iron ore, or hematite from this rock, was first smelted in 1864 near Irondale. Later, in 1876, coke pig iron was produced. In 1899, the Birmingham district first produced steel from Alabama hematite. In the early 1900s, 60 underground mines and surface pits produced the red ore. By 1967, the mines in the district had produced approximately 300 million tons of ore. In 1962, the district was producing more than 6 million tons of ore per year and was the third largest producer in the country. Since then, many mines in the United States have closed down because of the influx of cheaper, high grade foreign ore. In 1967, there were only two Alabama mines in operation, producing 1.5 million tons a year. This still put Birmingham fifth in the country in production of iron ore. Today, there are no red ore mines in operation in Alabama. It is estimated that there are at least 4.8 billion tons of red ore still unmined in the state. In times of national emergency, it would be possible to mine this ore. The end.